Would you believe me if I told you monsters are real? Maybe you're like me, and you've seen one firsthand, but probably not. So you probably wouldn't. You have to see them to believe. My mom and I, and my dad, lived in a beat-up mobile home inside of a dingy trailer park in Florida. We had no AC, no windows, and we used the bathroom in either a non-flushable plastic potty or made our way to the gas station toilet. They preferred I use the gas station toilet since it wouldn't stink up the trailer. But I hated it because of how the clerk looked at me. The gas station was open 24 hours, so at night, when both my parents were passed out in drunken stupors, I used to go there alone. The night shift clerk was a young, lanky guy with a bad case of acne, a pimpled skeleton. He always made me feel weird. Maybe it was the mixture of pity and scorn on his face when he gave me the bathroom key several times a week. Maybe it was the mocking, "You gonna buy anything this time?" That became his greeting. Maybe it was the implication of being young, female, and alone. I don't know. But he wasn't the monster. He was just some asshole. I've only ever met one real monster, and trust me, it was a lot more sinister, a lot more terrifying, and a lot more evil than this clerk could ever dream or want to be. That wasn't until after we moved from the trailer park, when I turned 11 years old, when I met the window man. Not that I knew it at the time, but our new house was $500 in rent, no questions asked, and no official lease. We moved there because of a dispute my father had with the trailer park landlord. I remember the lights didn't always work. The bugs came in through the screen door holes, and the tasteless, stained flower wallpaper was peeling in almost every room. To me though, the house was a castle, and I was its princess. The first night, I ran through every room, flipped all the lights on and off, and pretended the chipped golden paint on the doorknobs was real treasure. I remember flushing the toilet again and again until there was no water left in the tank, and my mom had to yell at me to knock it off. I guess water costs 7 cents a flush. Who could blame me though? When you come from a plastic potty, a flushable toilet becomes a porcelain throne. Going from 3 people in a cramped trailer to having my own room was something I never believed could happen. My own room meant, for the first time in my life, I had privacy. I'd missed the feeling of safety that came with sleeping in the same room as my parents. But I was about to turn 11, so I could tough it out. Their room was right down the hall anyways. The best part was my window. Not only would I have some relief from the heat of the Florida sun, but also I could look down on my kingdom of dilapidated multi-family homes, a broken ivy wall, and the mangled furniture in browning backyards with regal dignity. There were no blinds, but it didn't matter. I didn't have anything to hide. For those first few months, I'd spend hours, or at least it felt like hours, getting lost in that window, looking out at the trees, the deer, the swampy area, thinking about my castle, my family, and about how lucky I was to be there, how my new life was finally starting. I was naive for trusting that window. The thing about windows is that just as we use them to peer out to the world, we invite what's out there to peer back. A bright window at night acts as a portal into the most intimate parts of our lives. It puts us on display, and when you're looking out, you don't know it. But there are things just outside your field of vision looking back at you. Things barely noticeable in the darkness of the shadows. Things that peek at you from behind trees, along walls, in the dark, just outside of frame, and hide themselves when you try to reveal them. There are things in the dark that want to hurt you. 2 months after we first moved in, I woke up to a strange noise. A house is different from a trailer, in that there's always something weird to listen to, until I finally got to live in one. I had no idea how noisy they could be. Whenever the sound of the plumbing or the scurrying of nocturnal animals scared me, Daddy told me to pretend they were castle fairies, working to keep my new house running. So I'd hide under the blanket, shut my eyes, and think of fairies until I either fell asleep or gave up and creeped into my mommy and daddy's room to fall asleep between them. While in the pink glow of my My Little Pony nightlight, I tried to determine if I had just heard something or if I had dreamt it. I chalked it up to the fairies and laid my head back down on the pillow to drift back to sleep until I heard it again, a rustling and what sounded like footsteps far off in the yard, then down near the house. I remember saying something timid and childish like, "Hello, fairies?" When darkness, a shadow maybe, passed over the glass. I dived under my covers and tried not to move. It's funny. Kids think that going under the covers will actually protect them, that the covers are some type of impenetrable shield, a sacred barrier against the evils of the night. But if there was actually something out there, all they'd be doing is making themselves an easier target, an unseeing one. I stayed under the covers and didn't move for what must have been 15 minutes. But while I was under there, I started to have this feeling like something was watching me, peering into my room at me from the darkness of the night. I wished that my nightlight wasn't on, but I knew there was probably nothing there. So after that 15 minutes of petrified silence, I shut my eyes tight and peeped out from underneath the blanket. I turned my face to the window, telling myself to look, praying to God for it to be empty, and opened my eyes. There was nothing. Or was there? Was that something in the corner, or just the shadow of the moonlit tree? It went away. There it is again. Is that a branch, or is it hair? Is that a bird, or a hand? Is that a reflection, or are those eyes? There was glare on the window from my nightlight, so I couldn't quite see. I squinted and saw something. It wasn't a shadow, it was a head. A black head, darker than space, near featureless. It wasn't a reflection, they were eyes. Far too blue to be mine, far too blue to be human. A deep, shocking blue, the whole eye. They belonged to the face in the window, the face that had been watching me sleep. I screamed and ran to my parents' room. They woke up with a start. My dad said, "What's wrong?" And I told them about the figure in the window, how there was a man watching me. A monster. That was just a nightmare, sweetie. Go back to bed. It wasn't. There was something looking at me through the window. It was just a nightmare. But if it makes you feel better, I'll go look. My dad went to my room and looked out my window. Of course it was empty. He said there was no man looking through my window, that it's impossible because my room's on the second floor. But I knew what I saw. They let me sleep between them that night, just like in the trailer park. I didn't crawl into bed until after I closed their blinds. That night, I laid awake, eyes shut tight, and thought about the man in the window. My mom brushed the curls in my hair. There was a broken garden wall in the backyard, and one day, Daddy decided to fix it. I begged him not to. I told him that the window man would use it to climb back up to my room and get me. But he wouldn't listen. I think he did it so that we wouldn't seem like the poorest house on the block anymore. I mean, what screams wealth like an ivy wall? Daddy, please, the window man is gonna get me. Didn't seem to work. Neither did, if you put up that wall, I'm going to climb down it and run away. He did at least put curtains on my windows, fashioned from old bed sheets, and stuffed around the curtain rod. Out of sight, out of mind. Now you won't have to sleep in our room every night, he said. Out of sight, out of mind. That wasn't true. The window man was still very much in my mind. I started having nightmares more and more often, of those blue eyes staring at me, of that black figure following me, of ravenous teeth devouring me, chewing me up, and swallowing me whole. When I had dreams like that, I went to Mommy's room, and the only thing that calmed me down was feeling her fingers as they moved again and again through the curls in my hair. Repetition is soothing. Dad was starting to get sick of it though. She can't sleep in our room every night. Sooner or later, the girl has to grow up and learn to sleep in her own bed. That's how the month of July went, and by the end of it, the garden wall was finished. It took days of hammering, multiple trips to Home Depot, and countless beers. But Dad finally finished. His statement to the neighborhood, his facade of prosperity, like dealer's paint meticulously applied to a malfunctioning engine. I remember he was proud to celebrate, and he and Mom got drunk. It wasn't too special of a celebration. I mean, my parents would have gotten drunk anyways. They got drunk a lot, and then they yelled at each other, or maybe at the world. I didn't really know. I think they drank to escape, just like how I escaped into bulbous screen and some cathode ray tubes, into the world of Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, into the television, where a happy ending occurred every 15 minutes. I had a different kind of dream that night. In it, I felt my mom play with my hair. She moved through the curls, combined them with her fingers, straightened them out. That soothing rhythm, for some reason, she felt sad. I could tell she wanted to cry, but had to be strong for me. I put my arm around her leg to comfort her, and I went to look at her face, to tell her that everything would be alright. But when I looked into her eyes, they were blue, deep and opaque. She looked back at me with a sad, blue expression. Then the petting stopped. Her brows furrowed in confusion, like she suddenly forgot what she was doing, or who I was. Her eyebrow twitched, and her mouth curled into a snarl. I tried to sit up and get away from her, and her face contorted with anger. She grabbed onto my hair and yanked it hard, nearly ripping it off my scalp. I woke up and my eyes were watering. After a nightmare, my first instinct was to get up and go to my parents' room. My fear of the supernatural took priority over my fear of my dad's criticism. So I got out of bed and went to the door. And right as I was about to turn the doorknob to the hallway, I heard footsteps from downstairs. Heavy footsteps, plodding their way around the house. I thought it was Dad, drunkenly blundering about, masculine and uncaring, until I heard a snoring from the other room. Then it couldn't be him down there. It didn't sound like Mom's footsteps either, even if she were drunk. So what was down there? I didn't know, but also I did. A monster, the window man. Mom, Dad, I called out quietly, too quietly for them to hear me. I didn't want the window man to hear me either. The hairs on the back of my neck started to raise. I felt a shiver go down my spine. My body was telling me something, that there was something behind me, something looking at me from the window. I didn't dare turn around and see. At the same time, I heard footsteps downstairs. Mom, Dad, I raised my voice louder to wake them. Too loud. The footsteps downstairs stopped, a reaction to my call. Then they returned, this time with purpose. They made their way towards the stairs. Mom, Dad, I yelled it this time, but heard nothing from their room. I was at the door, petrified to leave because of whatever was on the stairs, and that feeling on the back of my neck, almost like heat. Energy from the stair that I knew was behind me. The window man had me surrounded. I heard a foot land on the first step of the stairs. It was now or never. I had to see if it was actually there behind me. I turned around to the window, the pitch black face, featureless but with its glowing eyes. A long, slender neck, looking at me with its unflinching gaze, malevolence behind the eyes. This time, I saw it had a mouth, like a thin black line. It opened it wide, and then wider, and then unhumanly wide, jawlessly wide, and the whole face was open. The inside of its mouth was even darker, blacker, more terrible than I ever thought possible. From that mouth, it let out a shriek, a piercing, shrill cry, so painfully loud I turned away and covered my ears. The sound pierced through my hands and stabbed my inner eardrum. Then a cacophony of sounds. That piercing, shrill scream, the breaking of glass downstairs, heavy and chaotic movement away from the stairs. A door opened and slammed. My parents were running. My mom shoved open the door, her hands over her ears, and just as she entered, the noise stopped. All of them did. My dad followed behind her, standing in the doorway, groggy and inebriated. They looked at me, a shocked expression on their face. As August came and passed, I would catch bits and pieces of hushed arguments from downstairs. What are we supposed to do with her? She can't keep sleeping in our room every night. Honey, she's just a child. She's going to be 11. When I was that age, I had long stopped sleeping in my parents' bed. And that scream, these lies about imaginary window men, the vase she broke downstairs. Honey, she just has an overactive imagination. She's still young and probably isn't used to the new house. I mean, she slept next to us for all of her life in that trailer. It makes sense that she misses us. The trailer? Damn it. This is all my fault. If I had just gotten us out of that trailer. Back then, None of us knew the reason why the house was so cheap, why there was no official lease. My dad happily adhered to the no questions asked policy as long as the lights and plumbing still worked. Well, mostly worked. Because the thing is, at a fair market price, any house would be well out of my parents' budget. Our income consisted of disability and food stamps. The reason that house was so cheap was because the year before we moved in, there was a double homicide, abduction, Emily and Amelia Spaulding. Someone had broken into the house by unknown means and killed 16-year-old Emily while she slept. Then they took 9-year-old Amelia Spaulding. The police conducted their investigation, but were unable to find any leads on the killer, nor were they able to locate Amelia until 3 months later, when they found her body stashed in a deep grotto of the Florida swamps. She was gray and red, slashed and chewed, desecrated by the marks of unspeakable acts. It was the night of my 11th birthday. I had vanilla ice cream cake from Carvel, my favorite. My parents had also gotten me a birthday present. I don't remember what it was. Next morning, it was my first day of school. The first day of school was always after my birthday. Well, after a night of cake and cartoons for me, and a night of beer and wine for my mom and dad, my mom set her glass of wine on my nightstand and tucked me into bed. She kissed me on the forehead and told me she knew that I'd have a perfect day tomorrow and to get some rest. As she left, she downed her glass. For the first time in a long time, sleep came easy. After birthday contentment mixed with excitement, I guess kids seem to forget things pretty quickly. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I woke up, before I opened my eyes and I knew something was wrong. Seriously wrong. I felt some kind of presence in my room. Instinctually, I looked to the window. It was open. Ajar to the terrors of the night. The curtains were blowing in the wind, and I didn't remember opening it. I didn't even know how, so I scanned the room, and there was something at the foot of my bed. I went to scream, but no sound escaped before I was grabbed. Hands pressed against my mouth kept the noise in. Then I felt weight against my body. Something heavy got on top of me and held me, struggling my body down. There was a zip sound, then duct tape was forcibly wrapped around my mouth and head. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, tightly wound. I looked up in terror, knowing that sinister dark face would be looking back at me. The one that made an appearance in every nightmare I'd had over the last 3 months. But it wasn't. It was a pale face. The pale face of a stranger, illuminated pink by the glow of my nightlight. Pasty and sweaty, a smirk on his lips, a sick glint in his eyes. He leaned in close and I smelled his rotten breath, putrid, like something dead. He laughed as he turned me over onto my stomach, a wicked laugh. He knew that he won, and that he had overpowered me, and that I was at his mercy. He put my hands behind my back and zip-tied them together, duct taped my legs. My struggles were futile. Then he picked me up and carried me. He brought me to the window and threw me out of it. I landed hard on a stack of dirty mattresses in the yard. I tried to wiggle around, escape, but was met with a sharp pain from my left leg and arm, and the inability to break free. I looked up and the man looked down at me from my open window. I started to cry, terrified of the man with his evil gaze and his rotten breath. Terrified of what he'd do to me. Then I saw a shadow pass over my head. It slithered up to the wall, up the ivy, and hovered right beside him. Blue eyes glaring, then a screech. That same high-pitched, wicked screech, loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. It startled the man into action. He turned around and swung his leg out from the window and onto the garden wall. He started to move his body out from the window, use the garden wall to make his escape, just as he had used it to enter. Then, the bottom of the window shattered from the piercing scream. The man looked up in surprise as glass rained on him. He continued his escape frantically now. His body was almost fully out of the house. All that was left was to remove his head and scale down, when by some invisible force, the shattered window slammed onto his neck, raining the side of the house in blood. The garden wall started to tear away from the house. His foot was caught in the cross paneling, his head caught in the window. I closed my eyes and looked away. I never saw the decapitation. I just laid there, eyes shut, until the screaming stopped and I heard the voice of my parents, then the sound of sirens. We moved back to a different trailer park for a few years, while we waited for the lawsuit against the landlord to go through. Negligence and malicious endangerment for capital gain. When we finally got the settlement, Daddy bought a brand new manufactured home. It had 2 rooms and a working toilet. One of the things pertinent to the case was an old newspaper article of the original murder. My mom showed it to me around the time I turned 17. Pictured were the Spaulding sisters, playing together weeks before the incident. Amelia with her beautiful curly hair, making up her own world with the dolls in her hands. Her sister next to her on the carpet, playing into her fantasy. I think for every monster out there, there's also an angel. A beautiful, righteous, true angel. One that protects us from the worst parts of the world. Because even in the dingy, faded, off-colored newspaper, Emily Spaulding had the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen.